Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York on a Friday. Donald Trump's chaos, incompetence, and governing at a time of war by Truth Social post has come back to bite him in the you-know-what when it comes to the war with Iran. An abrupt decision to launch an operation led to pushback from stalwart allies of the United States in the region and a humiliating public climb down by Donald Trump. Multiple outlets, including NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, are today able to report that Donald Trump was forced to stop what the administration had dubbed Project Freedom and announced it was a plan to help ships cross the Strait of Hormuz after Saudi Arabia refused to let the U.S. military use its bases and airspace. Here's how NBC News describes it. Quote, Trump surprised Gulf allies by announcing Project Freedom on social media Sunday afternoon, the official said, angering leadership in Saudi Arabia. The call between Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman did not resolve the issue, the two U.S. officials said, forcing the president to pause Project Freedom in order to restore U.S. military access to the critical airspace. Donald Trump angered other allies in the region as well. A Middle Eastern diplomat with knowledge of the matter told our colleague David Rode that Donald Trump failed to tell Oman, the country that sits on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. Other outlets report that Kuwait and Qatar were not informed either. The Trump administration insists that allies were notified in advance. Donald Trump claimed on Truth Social that the operation was paused because of progress in negotiations, but there is no known reporting to suggest that that is actually the case. Regardless, the operation was not going particularly well for the United States. Just 2 ships made it through the Strait of Hormuz in 36 hours. Here's how the Wall Street Journal describes the journey of one of those 2 ships. From that reporting, quote, the Alliance Fairfax, a towering black and white car carrier ship that had been stranded in the Persian Gulf for over 2 months, was finally making a break for it. Quote, you were all set to go, U.S. military officer radioed as the ship glided through the Strait of Hormuz on Monday and swung around the peninsula at the northern end of Oman. Safe travels. Soon after, Iran launched a barrage of missiles and drones at commercial ships at the U.S. Navy and at one of America's allies, the United Arab Emirates, where an oil transit hub was set ablaze. U.S. helicopters sank Iranian speedboats, and Iranian drones hit a civilian ship. The intervening hours included the most serious escalation in the conflict since President Trump declared a ceasefire in the war in April. That's where things stand right now. That's where we are. A ceasefire in which both the U.S. military and Iran are attacking each other, but also claiming that the ceasefire remains in effect. U.S. Central Command announced this morning that U.S. forces attacked 2 ships that were violating the blockade on Iranian ports. Donald Trump set back on his heels after backlash from close allies over a hastily arranged plan to break Iran's control over one of the world's most important waterways is unfortunately where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, Ben Rhodes, is back. Also joining us, Puck News senior political columnist and national affairs analyst John Heilman's here. And with me at the table, our national security reporter, the aforementioned David Rode. Everyone wants America to win. Everyone wants American military assets and any commercial assets to be safe. No one is...
Did you know there's a secret book? I didn't know there was, but Donald Trump now knows that there's one. Welcome back into Occupy Democrats. And in this breaking story, a top former aide at the Department of Homeland Security exposes what we didn't know about what does exist from before that Donald Trump very well may be trying to use to stay in power. And I'm going to show that story to you in just a few moments. But remember, Donald Trump is the man out loud who said this.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Then he ignored the law, which he eventually lost in court, and deployed the National Guard into Los Angeles against all norms and the law and Gavin Newsom. here.
The Trump administration has deployed 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines. California's governor Tuesday called it an illegal abuse of power.
This administration is pushing mass deportations, indiscriminately targeting hardworking immigrant families.
Federal laws generally ban the military from taking part in domestic law enforcement. But CBS News has learned Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem sent a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth asking for the military to detain or arrest lawbreakers.
And this just happened yesterday in Tennessee, where an African-American duly elected member of the House of Representatives was refused entry by, of course, a bunch of white guys to enter into a meeting involving the redistricting of the state of Tennessee here.
These maps are racist tools of white supremacy at the behest of the most powerful white supremacist in the United States of America, Donald J. Trump.
And Gavin Newsom states the obvious.
Evil. I mean, you got to condemn it. You got to call it out. But there's also an asymmetry here. You have the President of the United States that sets the tone and tenor for this country. And that's not a partisan statement. That's an institutional statement. Right. He's the president. He's not doing anything to try to unite this country in any way, shape, or form. And, for me, that's to me, that's the biggest reflection of this moment is just the sewer that we're now living in because of Donald Trump.
But in the end, this comes right out of Trump's mouth, and believe you me, he believes it here.
We will use every asset at our disposal to quell the violence and restore law and order.
But in this breaking story, there is a far more dark and sinister end of democracy scenario happening. And the book that was created was actually for a true, real doomsday scenario, except for the fact, when you look at Stephen Miller, Project 2025, every single thing Donald Trump's done, that book, now available and aware to Donald Trump, is what he is going to try and use to hang on to power by creating the very doomsday environment it needs to enact it. Check this freaking breaking story out.
Ex-aide warns White House has secret doomsday plan and Trump may be plotting to use it. Former Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor issued a dire warning Friday about a secret instruction book hidden in a secure location at the White House that contains a catalog of pre-drafted executive orders that would allow the president to do extraordinary things, powers that Taylor feared President Donald Trump may soon invoke. After I served in Donald Trump's administration, ultimately as Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security, one of the possibilities that worried me most was that the wrong person would gain access to that book, Taylor wrote in a report published Friday in the II paper. The president himself, although I once heard him refer to his magical authorities to bypass legal constraints, did not fully understand the powers he possessed, I was told. Informally known as the Doomsday Book,
this story of Project Freedom is ultimately not a story about one failed military operation. It is a story about what happens when you spend 4 years systematically degrading the alliance relationship that American military power depends on, and then try to conduct a complex military operation in a region where you need those relationships to function. Saudi Arabia didn't refuse airspaces access because of a bureaucratic miscommunication. Saudi Arabia refused because NBC looked at the totality of what the administration has done. The unsolicited announcement, the unrelated decisions, the war that began without consultation and has been conducted without partnership, the economic damage absorbed by Gulf states that opposed this conflict from the start and concluded that allowing U.S. aircraft to use Saudi airspace for an operation that would predictably trigger Iranian retaliation against Saudi oil infrastructure was not in Saudi Arabia's interest. That is not an alliance failure. That is an alliance making a rational calculation based on how it has been treated. The 50-year context matters here. This has not happened before. Saudi Arabia has been the cornerstone of American military positioning in the Gulf for half a century. The relationship has survived oil embargoes, Gulf Wars, September 11th, Khashoggi events that tested it severely. Trump managed to break it with a Truth Social post on a Sunday afternoon. The Beijing option being discussed openly by Gulf analysts is not hypothetical. Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, these are countries with sovereign wealth, funds in the hundreds of billions, with energy resources that China desperately needed, with security corners that the United States is currently failing to address. The hedging that Ben Rhodes describes as already beginning is the rational response of the governments that have watched the American security guarantee become contingent on whatever mood the president is in when he picks up his phone. China offers something different: predictability, transactional consistency, and the absence of truth social. The Russia dimension completes the picture. Iran's ability to conduct pinpointing accurate strikes against US facilities is almost certainly not organic. It reflects external intelligence support from a country with both sides' satellite capability and the motivation to provide it. Elevated oil prices fund Russia's war in Ukraine, degraded US military assessments in the Middle East, reduced American capacity to respond to other crises. Gulf states moving toward Chinese arrangements weakened, and the Western economic architecture and sanctions waivers on Russian oil sales to India, granted because American gas prices made enforcement politically impossible. Under years of pressure campaign in a single policy concession, every one of these outcomes serves Russian interests. None of them were accidentally byproducts. They were the foreseeable consequences of a war that the people who started it apparently didn't wargame past the first strike. The question of what the United States is actually trying to win has never been convincingly answered. Regime change didn't happen. The nuclear program wasn't a meaningful setback. The strait isn't open. The ceasefire is a semantic construct that both sides are violating, while both sides claim it remains in effect. What the left side is a president who is bored with his war, heading to a China summit from a position of demonstrated weakness, with Gulf allies who are publicly hedging towards Beijing, European allies who were belittled and excluded, and an adversary that has learned it can close the world's most important shipping lane and outlast the consequences. Iran didn't win this war in any conventional sense. It absorbed enormous damage. Thousands of its citizens are dead. Its infrastructure has been struck repeatedly, but it learned something worth more than any of that. It learned exactly how much pressure it takes to make the United States back down, that knowledge doesn't expire, it doesn't get destroyed in a strike package. It sits in Tehran's strategic calculation for the next decade and every negotiation that follows. That's the legacy being built here. Not a borrow, not a deal. Demonstrated answer to the question every adversary and every ally is always asking about American power. How far it actually go, and what makes it stop. Now they know.